All right, we'll get started. So this is going to be the recording for Module 2 for INFOST 440. So again, because Milwaukee decided to, freeze over, there's no on-site classes for today or tomorrow. So what we're going to do is kind of have we're going to have more of an online or remote style class. So what that means is that for both the on-site and online sections of the class, you guys are going to watch this recording of Module 2. I'm just going to record it myself in my office. And then after you've watched it, you'll have the information you need in order to do assignment 2, as well as another discussion post. For the online class, that's normal, but for the on-site class, normally it would have been attendance, like in-class attendance, which would have counted towards participation. But seeing as we didn't have that, you'll also have another discussion post to do instead. And both of those can be all the content, so the PowerPoint as well as the assignment 2, the discussion post can be found under module 2 on Canvas. Yeah, so let's jump straight into it. So the actual lecture part of this is going to cover 4 different parts. I did say I would do a little bit of HTML review. Again, a real quick, brief, rapid-fire review session of the stuff that you learned back in 240. From there, we're going to talk about what is a LAMP server or a LAMP stack. We're going to learn it, and then we're going to introduce PHP finally. And then the last, we're going to end this module by going over some PHP basics, which then you'll use for your assignment 2. Shocker. HTML review. So again, this is going to be a real brief overview, kind of a very high level, quickly rushing through. If you need to brush up on your HTML skills, there are plenty of good resources available. These are just 3 pretty standard, helpful ones: W3 Schools, Code Academy, and lynda.com. There are plenty more. The discussion post for this week will kind of ask actually kind of like what resources you use for finding and learning various technologies. So again, you guys are technology students and information studies majors. You should be able to find resources and find information that is helpful for you guys. General helpful tips when thinking about HTML is that if you to be looking at source codes of websites. So again, Control U for most browsers, or Google's inspect element features, which is F12, basically will kind of allow you to say how were some websites able to do something in HTML. So you might say like, oh, how do they make that button brown or gray or whatever it is? You can use the source code and the inspect element to kind of take a peek at like, oh, I see what they did. They did X, Y, or Z. So a couple of things to note real quick. We'll go into more details of what I mean in a little bit, but HTML is not a server-side language. It's a browser-run language that runs a end user's machines. What I mean by that is while PHP, which we'll get to later, runs on the web server, up in the cloud, quote unquote, HTML is run on whoever is visiting the website. That is where their personal computer is where the HTML runs. What this means is that when you're editing HTML documents, you can test it without having to upload it to a web server first. What I mean by that is, so I'm sure some of you are familiar. It's a bad example because that's PHP. But let's say you had an HTML document here. I'm not going to actually type anything. But up here, you might have hit the run and then launch in Chrome or any of these options to kind of as you were testing your program, or sorry, testing your web page. That works for HTML because it is a local language. That will not work for PHP. And again, we'll go into more details why later, but just keep that in mind that there's a difference between HTML and PHP going forward. Whereas HTML and actually CSS and JavaScript can all be run on the browser, so you can run them locally. PHP needs to be run on the server side. What that means in English is that for all of the PHP assignments and scripts you make this semester, when you're testing them, anytime you make a change to it, you have to re-upload it to the web server. You have to open up FileZilla and you have to drag over your new copy up to the web server. If you don't, and then you have to open up a real browser and go to the real URL. You can't just use the Notepad++ run and Chrome button. That won't work for PHP documents because PHP is a server-side language, so the server has to actually run the code, not the browser. Let's see here. So one thing with HTML to kind of remember, because we'll be using a couple of them just to kind of have a basic sense of it, is tables. So again, opening table tags, you open them and close them. TR tags to add various rows, and then TDs for, I actually don't remember what the D stands for. In my head, it's entries, but that doesn't start with a D. But basically, this allows you to, make a table within HTML. You probably in 240 made forms. You probably made some pretty basic standard forms using various input fields. We're going to be doing a whole bunch with forms in a couple of weeks. But again, so it's really important for you to brush up and remember just the basic HTML parts of forms. So by that, I mean we've got the open and closing form tags, and then we normally have a bunch of input types or input fields. So in this case, we have 2 text inputs. So input type equals text, give it a name, first name, and a name, last name, which then comes up with 2 nice little text boxes to input information. Radio buttons is another input type for forms. Basically, it's the input type equals radio. You give it a name, which then you pair with any other radio buttons that you want to be paired together. So if you select one, it unselects the other. Unique values for each one, and then a label just so they know what they're clicking. This will give you a set of radio buttons that if you click one, it'll unselect the other and vice versa. Checkboxes, so again, checkboxes, input type equals checkbox, and then you give it a name and a value. Name is a little less important, even though they can be grouped. It's not as critical as radio buttons were, where you needed to make sure that they were grouped together, so that way when you clicked one, it unselected the other. Checkboxes really are all kind of can act independently because each checkbox is either on or off by itself. And again, I know we're blazing through the HTML review section. It's more of just so you have the slides here so you can quickly reference them or know what to go back and refresh on. HTML, CSS, JavaScript comments. So the one thing is that always comment your source code. It's not only a requirement for this class, it's also just good practice. If you want to do any development work going forward, you need to be able to well comment your code. And it also just makes things easier for when you're debugging things when they inevitably go wrong. It's a way for you to kind of put an English translation into your code of what it's actually doing. In HTML, you learned that to do a comment, you did open caret, exclamation mark, dash, dash, whatever your comment is, and then you closed it with dash, dash, closing caret. For CSS, it was / star, whatever your comment was, and then star, backslash, or / sorry, and save for JavaScript. Note that these are different. So if you're currently in the HTML part of your document, you had to use an HTML type comment. And if you were in the CSS part of your document, you had to use a CSS comment. That still stands when we add PHP into the mix. Just the only difference is that PHP has its own comment syntax, and it's the same concept. If you're in the HTML part, you use an HTML comment. If you're in the CSS part, you use a CSS comment. JavaScript, JavaScript, PHP, PHP. Also, I'm realizing I spelled comments wrong up there. Fun. All right, kind of moving on. Again, this should be relatively review, but understanding the difference between an absolute file path and a relative file path. So an absolute file path is the full URL on the World Wide Web. It's basically, it'll always start with like HTTPS or HTTP : www.google.com/images/blah.png. It's the full URL that's, all the way, that basically there is no confusion. It's for external links only. So if you wanted to say put in, let's see, do I have a picture? Yeah, okay. So we'll just go through. So like an example here is, let's say if you wanted to have an HTML link, so an A tag with an href tag or an href value, and you wanted to tell it to go to yahoo.com, a completely separate website, you would put in the absolute file path http://yahoo.com. You could even put in www. It's the entire full URL. Absolute links have the full file extension, the full absolute path. It's a fixed, static, not variable, not dynamic. It's used to reference websites or files that are not on your current website or web space. So the idea is that if you wanted to display like the Google logo on your site, you would need to give it your image tag, the absolute path of this, I'm assuming this is like the old Google logo. Pull back, yep, see. So again, it's what you type in the URL bar, it's the full long absolute URL. This is different from a relative path. Relative paths are more dynamic and, well, they're pretty well named. They're relative to wherever you currently are. So if you have a web page that says like, hey, I want to find this link that's already on my web server, you don't need to give it the full URL, the full absolute static URL. You can just give it a relative path. So the example here is, let's say you had a folder with an HTML page in it, as well as a picture, something called profile.jpg. Well, I could, in theory, just do a normal A tag with the link http://www.uwmso, or my epanther id.uwmso.com/assignment2/profile.jpg, and it'd be a whole big mess of stuff here. Or I can use a relative link. You'll notice I do not have the HTTP at the beginning, and I just say, hey, from where this current file is running, look in the same spot for something called profile.jpg. And that is, it's able to find it because that's a relative path. This basically tells your browser to look in the same folder as your HTML file for that picture. So again, example here, if files are located in different folders, there are ways you can call them in while still using relative links, because in general, relative links are cleaner and better practice. So here's an example of an absolute link. So again, we got shul253.uwmso.com/images/profile/profile.jpg. Well, let's say you were at this page. You were on the main part of the uwmsos.com, and you had a page, profile.html, and you wanted on that profile.html to embed that JPEG image, this profile image. Well, you could do an A tag with this whole really long URL there, or to make it more cleanly, you could give as the href, the URL, you could just say /images/profile/profile.jpg. Because again, if you don't give it the beginning http:// it's going to assume it's a relative link, and it's going to say, all right, so from where I currently am, which is in this folder with profile.html, I need to go into this folder /images. All right, so we went to this folder /images. I need to go into this other folder called profile/profile, and I'll find something called profile.jpg, and there it is. So I didn't have to retell it all the stuff it already knows. I can just use a relative link. What's nice about this is, because let's say if you're comparing these two, let's see, can I highlight real quick? Let's say if you're comparing this link and this link. Let's say I move my entire website from shul253 to shul254, a completely different website. But if I just moved my my profile.html page, which one of these two is going to break and which one of these two is going to work? He said, realizing that he's giving a lecture to himself. To answer the question, this one would break, because this profile image, because we gave it an absolute path, is no longer going to find anything, because this doesn't exist anymore. That's not where it is anymore. It's under, shul 2000 or something different. Whereas this link will still work, because even though we might have moved on the main website, relatively, the profile.jpg is the same relative path away from profile.html. So again, it's a way for you to basically take whatever current file you're working with and relatively find other items. You're allowed to use either absolute or relative paths on your assignments. I don't actually care, as long as they work. Keep in mind, relative paths are going to make things cleaner, easier to transport, and they're just better practice. All right, I'm just going to grab a drink of water real quick. Don't mind me, just going to pause. I'm back. All right, section 2, we're going to talk about what is a LAMP stack. So what is a LAMP server? So first off, in general, when you hear people refer to a LAMP stack or a LAMP server, it's a 4-letter abbreviation where each of the 4 letters stands for a different part of a web stack. In general, there are 4 parts. You have an operating system, a web server, a database server, and a server-side programming language. The most popular and freely available bundle, and the one that we'll be learning, is called LAMP, which is made up of Linux for an operating system, Apache for the web server, MySQL for the database server, and PHP for the server-side programming language. So going through each one of these a little bit more detailed. So first off, the L in LAMP stands for Linux. So Linux is a free Unix operating system. So again, other operating systems you might be familiar with is Microsoft Windows or Mac OS. Linux is another operating system like those two, but it's completely free and open source. It also is relatively lightweight, which makes it really good for running web servers, because unlike, say, your personal computer where you might want to have Windows, if it's your day-to-day computer, you might want to have an operating system that's a little bit more front-end user easy to use. Whereas Linux, you won't, once your web server is running, you're not going to be looking at it. That's just the operating system that's running behind the scenes. And Linux can basically run on anything: PCs, old phones, cars, laptops, whatever it may be. Linux can basically run on everything, and it's completely free. So since this is kind of more the behind the scenes kind of maintenance side of your web servers, why would you pay for something like Windows 10 or Mac OS when you could use Linux when it's completely free? Because it's open source, there are plenty of different flavors of Linux, generally called distributions. So examples of those is Ubuntu, CentOS, Red Hat, Fedora, etc. And basically, because it's free and anyone can download the Linux source code and change it and modify it, you can customize various Linux distributions to do kind of different things better than others. So, like for example, in my day job, working in the security testing field, we primarily use something called Kali Linux, which is a Linux distribution that's really focused on having a bunch of security tools installed. But something like CentOS is really good for running like web servers. For example, the SOAS web space accounts are generally run on a CentOS server. So again, the L in the LAMP stack stands for Linux, and also their logo is a penguin. That's why there's a random penguin there. So quick question at this point that sometimes pops up is, can you have a LAMP stack on Windows? Let's say for whatever reason, maybe you have a Microsoft contract, or for whatever reason you can't do a Linux server. Well, the rest of the letters, the A, M, and P, which we'll get to in a second, they can still work. They can still be installed on Windows. You can kind of switch in and out these letters. You just end up with a different acronym. So if you had a Windows Apache MySQL PHP web stack, you wouldn't have a LAMP per se, you'd have, well, a WAMP server. And again, there are tools that allow you to make the setup between a LAMP and a WAMP depending on what you have set up. Again, we'll be using the LAMP stack just because, again, it's all completely free, it's open source, it's still the most popular web stack there is. There are some other popular ones which we'll get into. But again, for all these, you'll notice there's a couple different choices, so we're just kind of picking one to work with, but there are plenty of choices for each of the 4 letters. Apache. So the A in LAMP stands for Apache. It's basically the world's most popular web server. It runs a majority of the websites in the world. It's free. It's open source. It basically will help process. It'll help serve up your websites when process those. You won't actually ever deal with Apache like directly. It'll be more of you just install it if you're making your own web server, and then you kind of forget about it that it's there. Again, you'll notice something common from with Linux. So with Linux, one important thing to keep in mind is that it was completely free and open source. And you'll notice something else with Apache, that it is also free and open source. I wonder if that's a coincidence or not. To the next one, because shocker, it's not a coincidence. You'll notice the next ones are also both free and open source. MySQL and PHP. So we're going to cover, these are the 2 parts of the LAMP stack that we will actually spend specific time in this class working on. We're going to spend a couple of weeks on MySQL and then the rest of the semester on PHP. They both need to be configured to work with Apache as well as the Linux operating system, which then allows you to end up with the LAMP stack, which allows you to do some web development in PHP. The student web spaces are already configured for you, so they are already a LAMP stack ready. They run, last I checked, CentOS, Apache, MySQL, and PHP, so they're all ready. But again, the one thing to keep in mind here, and the recurring theme is, both of these are free. MySQL and PHP are both free and open source. And the reason why I bring that up, let's see here. I don't have a slide in it, but the reason I bring this up is because there will be plenty who will argue, and you might come across them, or you might see jokes on the internet of people saying like, well, why do you use, why do you use a lamp stack when X, Y, or Z is better? Or, this new cool thing, whatever it may be. And the reason why the internet mostly runs on lamp servers and lamp stacks is because it was free. It was the original free option. There were plenty of paid options, but you know what? When given a choice of doing something free or paid, a lot of people tend to choose the free option if it works just as well. So there are proprietary versions of these. Windows has their own kind of environment and their own web stack. But in general, the reason why the LAMP stack is still generally kind of the top dog is because it's all of its parts are free and open source and completely customizable. And again, that's a common theme you've noticed with kind of all this internet stuff, like all the kind of layering that we talked last week, how the internet kind of just has been duct taped together and added on and added on. Generally, it was always the free options won out. MySQL, just to go back for a second, MySQL has a few weird bugs to it compared to its Microsoft counterpart. But guess which one's free, and guess which one costs thousands of dollars, and guess which one's the more popular choice, even if it's buggy. All right, jumping into actually going to learn what PHP is. So the first part is, let me pause for 1 second, I'm going to grab water. All right, first thing we got to talk about is, well, what does PHP stand for? Looks like it's an acronym for something, and you would be kind of right. So it's one of my favorite fun facts about PHP is what's on the next slide. And the reason why it's my favorite fun fact is because I feel like it just describes the essence of PHP so well. PHP stands for PHP Hypertext Preprocessor. That is correct. The P in PHP stands for PHP. Does that make sense? No, but whatever. That's just kind of how it was. It wasn't meant to stand for anything. So literally the P in PHP stands for PHP. So the full PHP stands for PHP Hypertext Preprocessor. I don't know. I find that really funny because that seems really not professional in my mind. And it's kind of just a weird, odd quirk that you will find a lot as you're working with PHP. It has a lot of kind of odd quirks like that. And again, this was not something that was designed by like professionals, like a giant company that was releasing, the next, server-side processing language. No, it was created by a guy basically in his garage. I don't know if it was physically his garage, but it was basically invented by this one guy. So, but guess why? Can anyone take it? Again, I'm realizing all my kind of questions I normally ask here, I can't really ask because I'm alone in my office, but I'm just going to go with it anyways. So can you take a guess as to why this random guy's language that he made in his garage, why did that become the dominant server-side language at that point when there were plenty of other better, like for all intent and purposes, better server-side languages? Because his was free. Shocker. Again, the internet basically grew on free and open source. So that's why we end up with the weird PHP hypertext preprocessor name, because it was the free and open source scripting language of its day. So that is why we have it now. So we already kind of alluded to this earlier, but PHP is a server-side scripting language, not a browser-side scripting language. So remember how HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are all local languages, they're browser-based languages. So the end user, the person who actually is visiting your website, it's their computer in their browser that is actually running that code. PHP is not. PHP is a server-side scripting language. What this means is that your web server, your LAMP stack, is what is actually processing and executing that PHP code. So again, that the really important thing to take from that, if you're not going to the theoretical part of it, is that when you're editing your PHP scripts, you need to re-upload every time you make a change and go to a browser to look at it. You can't just use the run as button in Notepad++ or something like that. It will not work. You need to re-upload the files every time you change it, and then go to the URL to go to your actual web space account in a browser to see your PHP files actually run. Yeah, so we talked about, so PHP is a powerful server-side language, and it's used to create dynamic and interactive websites. So a little bit more background information. We kind of talked about this. It's free, it's open source, it's widely used. It was influenced by Perl, C, Java, C++. So if you have experience in any of those languages, maybe that'll help. Maybe it'll just make you more confused because PHP is its own unique beast. I don't know. But regardless, it works well with HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and other technologies. There are paid alternatives, ASP.NET, Cold Fusion. And again, the reason why PHP is still the dominant server-side language is because it was free and open source. It's normally now that I kind of get on my soapbox just for a minute because a lot of people, especially more technical oriented people, will talk about how the internet has kind of makes it's a common joke on the internet of how terrible PHP is and how it's the worst language ever. So, and also I get told a lot from people that it's on its way out, that this new thing, X, Y, or Z, or whatever it is going to completely replace PHP because it's 1,000 times better. And, you know, while I accept that, there's always kind of cool new languages and cool new processes and frameworks going on, I'm just going to point out that a majority of the internet, a vast majority of the internet, still runs PHP as its server-side scripting language. I don't see it going anywhere anytime soon. Now, given there's a lot of customizations, because again, it's open source, so there's a couple PHP frameworks that are popular, but I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. Again, there might be some cool new things, like a lot of the more kind of startup web companies will be using, they'll use something like Ruby on Rails, or they'll use their own cool new hip exciting coding languages for their various web scripting languages and stuff. But at the end of the day, PHP is free. It's open source. It runs really well with everything. There's a ton of resources on it, and it works pretty well. So there's my little spiel with that. The times you might use the paid alternatives. Basically, if your company tells you need to use it, that's probably when you'll use a paid alternative. Like you might use the Microsoft environment if your company is, pays for the Microsoft environment, so it's already included in their contract, so then they use it. But yeah, so that's PHP in a nutshell. Oh, yeah. All right. So again, I've talked about this a little bit. I can tell I had a slide on it. So it's a server-side language, so the code is processed on the server, not in your browser. So to just again show this once more, is I'm going to pull up a PHP file and try and run it using that Run As button in Notepad++, as well as just open it on my desktop, and we'll see what happens. Let's see here. Let me just pull up. You know what? I'm just going to pause for 1 second while I get a file. All right, so I've got one here. So basically, I've just got a PHP file. Again, you don't need to actually know the PHP code yet. We don't know that yet, but just trust me when I say that this is a PHP file. And if I go and tell it to run as in Chrome, this is what I end up getting. Well, that doesn't look like a website. That just looks like it literally just dumped my code onto the page. And that's because, again, your browser doesn't know how to run PHP code, only that your web server does. Anytime that you're trying to run PHP code, you can't have like where it's this file : / and then, if it gives you a local link, that will not work for your PHP code. You have to always open up FileZilla, retransfer the file over, and then go to wherever you actually uploaded the file. So you have to actually go to your WebSpace account, wherever that may be. PowerPoint examples. So here. So like this is an example of a PHP script where, since I'm actually going to the actual website, the actual web server is going to run that PHP and actually process it. Let's pull the PowerPoint back. So I'm going to lose my spot. Lovely. There we go. So yeah, so you have to always upload your code in order to test it or run it. All right, so how does PHP work? So PHP is normally used in combination with a web server like Apache. The general gist, do I have a picture? Yeah. Okay, in general, PHP scripts are received by that web server, so like Apache. It will then use a PHP interpreter to basically kind of run the logic in your PHP, and then whatever the results are then sent back to the website to display. And okay, again, I kind of went through that quickly because I can think the picture works better. So this is kind of in general how a normal HTML web page works. your client or the end user says, I want to go to hippo.com, whatever it may be, that your browser sends a request to a web server and says, hey, give me the stuff for hippo.com. And the web server says, all right, here's all the HTML that I have for hippo.com, and sends it back and displays it on your client's machine. PHP adds a middle step to this. Ignore these things on the right here. They're kind of really old, but just look at this stuff here. So there's a middle step here. The client will say, hey, I want to access hippo.com. The web server says, all right, let me look up hippo.com. Oh, hey, there's PHP code here. Let me send this PHP code to my PHP interpreter. PHP interpreter says, hey, I've interpreted your PHP. This is what it means, web server. And the web server says, hey, thanks. All right, client, here is the outputted HTML, and sends it back to the web server, or sorry, back to the client. You'll notice that in both these scenarios, the web server, at the end of the day, the last step is still sending just regular HTML to the client to display. PHP is just a way to make different HTML outputs for different things. But at the end of the day, any website that is even dynamically created by PHP or something else, you can still hit Control-U and look at the outputted source code. That is the final output of a server-side scripting language after it runs through everything, is regular HTML. So an example here, and again, don't worry about the syntax as well, we'll be getting to that later. So we've got these 3 lines right here. We've got PHP, print hello world, and another something weird here. These 3 lines is what the clients, when they access the website and the web service says, oh, hey, this is what I have. The PHP interpreter will take this PHP block right here and tell it to output just the words hello world. So then what's sent back to the client is just the regular HTML with the PHP no longer there. It just has outputted HTML. So again, the important thing to understand there is that PHP is used to basically do logic and a lot of other cool stuff. But at the end of the day, after it's all done, the PHP's run, what you're left with is just HTML that runs in your browser like you're used to. Oops. So we've already kind of alluded to this a couple different times, but why would we want to do that? Why do we want that extra step? Well, it allows websites to become dynamic. It allows you to display different content, different and unique content for various different things. For example, it allows you, let's say, you want to have a website where it displays who's currently logged in. It wants to have a button in the upper left hand that has your name and your profile image or whatever it is. Well, you can do that using PHP because it'll dynamically pull that information, even though you're all visiting the same website. So like a good example for this is like facebook.com. We're all visiting the same URL, facebook.com. It's not like I'm going to facebook.com/Sam and you're not going to facebook.com/Bob. We're all going to facebook.com, but it's dynamically different for each one of us based off some logic. In this case, who's logged in or what should they see? It's different for each person. Normally, dynamic websites will retrieve information from a database. So the idea is that we could have like a web form. That's going to be pretty similar to what our final project's going to be based off. But the idea of being able to store information and change information, have a comment box, be able to take input from users and store it and display it in other different parts of your website. It allows you to pull dynamic variables and just in general use logic to do cool things. Basically, any site that is not a static HTML site is considered dynamic and is doing something cool like this. This list may or may not be up to date from when I copied and pasted it, but major websites that use PHP in some way, shape, or form, Google, Apple, Facebook, Yahoo, Wikipedia, Dig, SitePoint, Amazon, eBay, YouTube, and Flickr. Now again, given the disclaimer being in some way, shape, or form. Facebook used to be entirely just a PHP. Now they use their own kind of custom version that's based off PHP, but it's its own kind of custom thing now because again, it's open source, so they were able to do that. But in general, a lot of major websites still use PHP in some way, shape, or form because it works pretty well. Probably one of the most popular parts or popular uses of PHP is that the 3 most popular open source web content management systems, WordPress, Drupal, and Joomla, are made in PHP. And also more to the point, of those 3, WordPress is literally a third, last I checked, of the entire World Wide Web, and WordPress is PHP. So if you download the source code for WordPress, you'll look it up and you know what you'll see is a bunch of PHP files. You could look through all these PHP files and you will be very confused at this point. By the end of the semester, though, if you were to go and download the WordPress source code, look at all the PHP files, you would be slightly less, but still significantly confused. The WordPress source code is very complex. You might understand, at least in general, what's going on, but remember, this is just your intro to the class. So don't be expecting to be able to rewrite completely understand it, but you'll get the gist of it and you'll know how to research the parts you don't know. All right. All right, the last section we have to go over this week is some PHP basics. So the first thing you need to know is how to actually call PHP code. So the main thing is that you need these opening and closing PHP tags. And they're kind of weird, they're not symmetrical, but they are what they are. And that is this open caret question mark PHP, and then you close it with question mark closing caret. So then anything in between those two will be considered a PHP scripting block. You can place these blocks anywhere in your code. So what's nice is that you can basically put this PHP code inside the regular HTML. So if you look here, like if you ignore the part in red, this is a normal HTML, it's got the doc type, it's got the HTML, the header, the title, the body. But in here, I've got a script block of PHP. So I open the PHP tag here and I close it here. Again, we'll be learning about this in a second. You can kind of take a guess at what it's going to do. But if I pull up this example, also, if you ever see in any of the PowerPoints a name of a file in the bottom corner, that'll be following along with what's called the PowerPoint examples, which I'm realizing I don't actually have on Canvas right now. I'll get those on Canvas when I post this video as well. But basically, if they follow along with the PowerPoint, there's no surprises. Example 1.php is literally what is screenshotted here. So it's a little less important with these first couple of weeks because the code's pretty self-explanatory. The code is all here for you. But in the later ones, if you wanted to take a look and follow along and work with them, you definitely can do that. But like here, so let's take a look at, I'm going to open up example 1.php. And again, it's the same thing that's in the picture here, but we've got regular just HTML code, and then I've got a block here of PHP code where I open it here, I close it here, and I run some PHP code. So I want to run this code, so I can't just hit run and run in Chrome. That won't work, or launch in Chrome. We learned that won't work. So instead, I got to go back over to FileZilla, and I have to basically re-upload this to my web server. So I drag it over here. So like, let's say this one wasn't here. I'm going to re-upload it. So now it's there. So now if I want to go take a look at this file, go pull up INFOST 440, week 2, PowerPoint examples, example 1. Oh, yeah, that's right. So this is the output for that file. Let's see, I'm just going to make this smaller if I can. Actually, just hang on. That didn't make it much better at all, did it? But regardless. Sorry, my computer's going a little slow. I'm VPNing into my work computer from my home because I don't want to go outside. But basically, this chunk of code, I'm trying to make it a little, yeah, that'll work. This whole code turned into this right here. And if we control U and look at the source code of this page, you'll notice a couple things. So one, the doc type's the same, the header's the same, the title's the same, the body tag is the same, this regular HTML is the same, this is some regular text, this is some regular text. But the PHP code, well, the PHP tags are gone. All we see is this output that we write here. This is some PHP text. So even though that we ran PHP file, the output was just regular HTML at the end of the day. So again, if you haven't guessed yet, and again, we'll be talking about it shortly, echo is a way to basically just put text on your HTML page. So in this case, it pops up as saying this is some PHP text. Let's pull this back. Oops. Oh, hey, Look at that, a very nicely split screen of exactly what I was trying to do. It's almost as if I've run into these issues before and have fixed them in the past and have totally forgot that I did that. Regardless, so as you can see here, this is an example of the code on the left has the output on the right. The main thing to remember from that is that you need to open every PHP block of code with that open caret question mark PHP, and you need to close it with a question mark closing caret. The other thing you need to do is that you need to put a semicolon at the end of every line of PHP. So if you'll see here, we've got echo, this is some PHP text, and then I have a semicolon at the end. If you forget a semicolon, it won't run. It'll give you a nice error message saying that, hey, I don't know what to do with this. PHP is kind of picky in that way, and you need to make sure that you always have a semicolon at any time that you're running any PHP code. PHP comments. So again, we talked about HTML and CSS comments. Well, PHP has their own syntax for comments, a little similar, a little different. For a single line comment, it's 2 forward slashes, so // and then it's your comment. For a multi-line comment, it's /*, whatever your comment is, and then you can end it with /*. So you can see an example of that there. You need to be using comments on your assignments. It's a requirement on all assignments and just in life if you're going to code. It's very important. Let's see here. But again, like we talked about with the HTML and CSS comments, the type of comment you use, so again, whether or not you're using // or the HTML type comment depends on what your code currently is. So if you're inside the opening and closing PHP tags, you need to use PHP comments. If you put an HTML comment here, it's going to error out and it's not going to work. It's going to be broken. So if you're inside the PHP tags, you need to use the PHP style comments. All right, so the first actual thing we're going to do in PHP, we already kind of had a sneak peek of it, is we're going to talk about echo and print. So echo and print are commands that basically allows you to output text onto an HTML page. So you can look up example 2 if you'd like, but again, it's literally this is the entire code, is that we have a PHP block here with a comment that says this is the best with a lot of junk information here. And then I have 2 lines. I've got echo, this is some PHP text using echo with a semicolon at the end, and then I use a print statement that says this is some PHP text using print with a semicolon at the end. When I run when I upload this to the web server and I go to the website, this is what I end up as my output. I see this first echoed outline here, and I see the second printed outline here. Couple things to note. One, you don't see the comment anywhere. Again, comments are hidden from the output. Those are only to make your code more human readable for, well, humans. The actual output will just have what the PHP code is. It won't actually care about the comments. You'll also notice that the echo line and the print line did basically the same thing. And you would be right to point that out. So a good question at this point would be, well, what's the difference between echo and print? Well, for all intent and purposes, at least for this class, they're basically the same thing. There are some technical differences that you can go research if you want, but really they do the exact same thing. So the question becomes, well, which one do we use? For me personally and for this class, I generally will be using echo for everything, and I'll tell you why. And it's kind of a funny reason why a lot more people use echo than print. Echo is 4 characters, print is 5 characters. That little bit of, laziness, it's easier to type out echo than it is print is part of it, but more to the point, if you've got a massive website that's running a ton of PHP scripts, it's literally more efficient to be using echo than print because those files are just ever so slightly smaller. So again, echo and print do basically the same thing, but at this point going forward, I'll probably just be using echo in all the examples, but you're free to use what you'd like. PHP variables. So again, you learned what variables were in your Python class or hopefully some other class, but basically it's a way to it's a storage location for a value of some kind. In PHP, variables are given the special symbol, the $sign. So the general syntax for a variable is you say $, whatever your variable name is, you can name it whatever you want, equals, and then you give it a value, whatever you want that variable to be equal to, and then end it with a semicolon because all PHP lines need to end with a semicolon. Yeah, so again, it's $ whatever equals something. An example here is the code here, and this is the output here. I have 3 variables that I set here. So I have one that says $name equals Sam Goerke inside quotes with a semicolon at the end. Because I want it to be a string of characters, I need to put those double quotation marks around it. We'll learn about the difference between double and single quotation marks next week. So just for this week, just use double quotation marks if you're going to be setting things equal to strings. If you're setting things equal to a number or like an integer, you can just say you don't need the quotation marks. So like here, $fave number equals 28, and $hippo equals smiley face. Because again, your variable names can be whatever you want, and they can be equal to whatever you want. A common question that normally comes up here from people who've had more coding experience is whether or not you need to declare a type for your variables to have a type. So in this case, how does it know that name is going to be a string of characters, Sam Goerke, whereas fave number is going to be a number? PHP is a context-based language, so it just guesses. It's pretty good at it. You don't need to tell it what type of variable your variable is. You just need to tell it the information and it'll figure it out. If you say name is equal to and give it a quoted string, it's going to assume that it's a string. If you say a variable is equal to a number without a decimal point, it's going to assume it's an integer. If you give it a, et cetera, et cetera. So you don't need to worry about that for PHP. So that's one nice thing. Down here at the bottom, we have 5 echo lines. So the nice thing about variables is that you can echo them out. So if we remember from the previous page, I could echo out a string where I could say echo out this is some PHP text, and actually type that out. I can also just say echo $name, and it'll pop up with Sam Goerke. It'll look up that value for that variable and echo it out to the screen. I also said echo out br slash and an HTML line break. And the reason for that is because if I didn't have that line, all 3 of these would be pushed onto one line. Because again, it's at the end of the outputting HTML. So if I want to have a line break on any of my outputted PHP stuff, I need to include, well, a HTML line break. So the easiest way to do that is to say echo and then just give it the HTML line break. Because again, at the end of the day, the web browser doesn't care where it got the HTML, it just, displays it. So that's a nice trick if you want line breaks in your code. You can just say echo out and echo out a line break. Also, I think nowadays you guys were taught that you don't need this /. If that's the case, by all means, go ahead and do that. I was taught to use it, so I still have it, but I think it works both ways. Do however you were taught with that. Because it was lagging. Stand by. There we go. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about PHP concatenation. So first off, what is concatenation? So basically, concatenation is a way to paste 2 strings together. It's a way to basically shove 2 strings together in order to change your output. Apparently, it's also known as a string operator. I kind of forgot about that, but there it is. And its idea is that you can join 2 variables together, kind of like a string of variables. The special symbol in PHP for concatenation is a period. So here's a very basic example of it. Let's say I have a variable called SOAS, so $SOAS is equal to we are SOAS with a semicolon. It's the string we are SOAS. And now I'm going to create a new variable called best, and I'm going to have that be equal to the variable SOAS concatenated with the string we are the best. Now when I echo out that best variable, I end up with we are SOAS, we are the best. It took the first part, SOAS, we are SOAS, and concatenated, so just pasted it together with we are the best. So again, that's used for like a very basic example of that is if you kind of remember from like old school video games, at some point it would ask you what your name is, like, what is your name, adventure? And you'd say Sam or Hippo or whatever. And then it would pop up with a message saying like, hello, hello, comma, Sam, or something to that effect. You could do that with concatenation. You could have it say, a variable called greeting is equal to, hello, traveler, hello, traveler, your name is, concatenate $name, and then if you asked for their name earlier, it would say, Bob or whatever it is. So again, it's a way to basically string 2 variables or different strings together. I shouldn't say 2 variables together. You can concatenate multiple times. If you just put a period after that quotation marks before the semicolon and added on more strings or more variables, you can do that as well. You can concatenate as much as you want. Next thing we're going to talk about is PHP operators. So first off, what is an operator? It's basically allows you to do logic in PHP. It's fundamental to any programming languages. It's generally used with things like if statements. We're going to learn about the syntax of if statements next week. Again, this is just focusing on just the operators themselves. But in general, it's things like if you want to check to see if variable A is larger than variable B, and if it is, echo out A is bigger than B. Something to that effect. Oops. There we go. So these are the syntax for PHP operators, or at least the basic ones. In general, we've got equals equals means is equal to. Exclamation point generally will always negate whatever's after it. So $equals means is not equal to. This is also another way to do is not equal to, but generally this one's more popular. Greater than, less than, 2 ampersands together means and. You can also just type out the word and, it'll also work. 2 horizontal bars, which can be found the key underneath the escape key, or you can type out the word or. And then just an exclamation point generally means not, or yeah, so that one I don't think you can type out the word not because that's context based, but these two and an or you could just spell out, but the rest of them you can use the symbols, will probably just be the safest way. So an example of that up here. So again, you don't need to know the syntax of the if statement here, but just know that in general what it's doing. So first we have two variables. We have variable A is equal to 5 and variable B is equal to 10. We're then checking to say, hey, if variable A is less than variable B, do something. In this case, it's going to echo out variable A concatenated with is smaller than concatenate variable B. So then when I run this, I will end up with, yep, 5 is smaller than 10. If I change this to $A is something else, let's do that actually. Give me 1 second. Let's pull up example 5 real quick. And let's change this. So like again, so we already went through, pulled up how it is now before I break it. Yep, so right now when I run that page, I end up with 5 is smaller than 10. But let's say I change this to, what's another operator we can use? Let's do is equal to. Let's try that. So let's try, is variable A equal to variable B? If so, do the following. If I save this and re-upload it, so I drag it over. Sorry, again, my computer's lagging a little bit. Oops, not that one, this one. All right, re-upload it. So now when I go pull up that site and I refresh that page, I get nothing. Because if we kind of look at our logic for that, oops, except we changed it. Oops, where'd it go? Is A equal to 10? No, so it didn't do this. So it didn't do anything. So again, PHP operators basically allow us to bring logic into our PHP code. It allows us to basically say, hey, if this is something to this, so if A is less than B or B is greater than 12 or anything to that effect, do the following, or if not, do something else. The last thing we're going to talk about is something called a PHP info page. So PHP info page is a built-in function in PHP that'll basically is kind of helpful for debugging and kind of giving a lot of basic information about your PHP server. The entire code for a PHP info page is what's in red here. You have the open PHP tag, PHP info, one word, open and close in parentheses, semicolon, and then the closing PHP tag. That's it. That will be the entire page, and that'll turn into something crazy like this. Let's take a look at that. So if I pull up, I've got something called PHP info, and this is literally the entire file, phpinfo.php. And if I upload that to the server, and then I go to that file, back. This is what I end up with. I end up with a really big, long PHP info file with a whole bunch of information. Stuff like telling you what versions of things are installed on your server, what various processes, where files are located, different configuration settings. It's information about your PHP setup. Version of the running, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, that might be helpful on the extra credit. Now, one thing I like to point out here is that, so again, I already showed you the source code of this page from the PHP side. This is it. Just the open 8 PHP, the PHP info. Actually, if I was being cleaner, I should have a semicolon there. And then the closing tag right there. But if you look at the outputted source code of this page, so I'm going to hit Control U, you'll see a lot more than just that one line of code. You're going to see a whole bunch of HTML that was generated to make this purple thing. For this week's assignment, you're going to be asked to make a PHP info page. Do not, I repeat, do not just go to my sample one, select all from this, copy and paste that into your file and submit that. Not only was that much harder than just typing out literally how many characters is this? 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, less than 20 characters. It's also very wrong because the idea is that tells me you don't actually understand what's happening here. We didn't type any of this ourselves. We used a PHP function that then basically generated all this information for us. We're trying to make the computer do the work, not us. Let's see here, pull the PowerPoint back. One last thing to note, I mentioned it last week, but I want to reiterate it here. So you'll notice the files that we've been running, if I can pull them up real quick, they've all ended with .php. So in your 240 classes, you probably ended all of your files with .html. In this class, all of your files need to be .php. But on the good side, you'll notice in a lot of our examples, we've had HTML code in them. Let me go back real quick. Like this one. This had HTML code in it, but it was called .php. And that's because if it's given a .php extension, it can run not only PHP code, but it also knows how to run regular HTML code. If I would have named this example3.html, it would have done all right. It would know what to do with the HTML here, but it would not have known what to do with the PHP code. So basically, it's kind of like the, all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares type of thing. If you name something .html, it can only run HTML. If you name something .php, it can run PHP code and HTML code. So for this class, all of our stuff will be named .php. All right, so that's all we have for lecture for this week. So I'm going to quickly go over two and a couple things in Canvas, and then I'll end it there. But so stand by. So I drag this over. I'll drag over too, since we're sharing the lecture, the online section as well. But again, both sections will have a module 2 with the PowerPoint. I will also upload the class recording after this, as well as a zip folder of the PowerPoint examples if you'd like. Again, they're all the codes in the PowerPoint anyways, but it's there for you if you'd like. You'll each have to do both the online and the on-site class. We'll have to do the discussion post for this week. And then there's assignment 2, which I'm going to go through in a second. Last thing this is something new that I'm trying to do. So I do have on this module an optional poll. This is completely, optional. It's not part of your grade or anything, but basically I'm going to ask for feedback after each assignment, basically just asking you how hard it was and also if you had any feedback to make it better. So again, it's not worth anything. It's literally just to kind of help me make the assignments better for future students. But basically each week it's going to be the same 2 questions. 1, how difficult was the assignment, 1 to 10, and then also is there any feedback or anything that I can do better or make clear on that specific assignment. Again, I know the first assignment was pretty easy. The average grade was like 105%. But going further down the line, I would like to get, this is a good way for you guys to give me some feedback, some instant feedback, so I can kind of change and make the assignments better. But let's go look at assignment 2, which is what you do have to do this week by Monday at 11:59. So assignment 2 says the following. So 1, create a folder in the root of your web space called assignment 2 and complete the rest of the assignment within this folder. So again, kind of since it's the first one, I don't mind kind of just doing a walkthrough real quick. Oops, let's see here. So let's say here, I've got my public HTML folder. And again, if you have your own organizational system, that's fine. So if you have it like in an INFOST 440 folder, that's fine. You can do that as long as that at some point you have an assignment 2 folder. So I'm going to go and create a new, and again, this should be pretty much review from INFOST 240. Okay, so now within that folder is where I'm going to put the following things. I'm going to have 2 files, something called index.php and something called, three files, index.php, first PHP page.php, and PHP info page. So if you want, you could go ahead and create 3 blank files and get them open up in Notepad++ and get them ready. But basically, you're going to have 3 files here. You're going to have something called index.php, first PHP page.php, and PHP info. The index page is going to be a proper index page. So remember what I mean by that is you need to name it exactly index all lowercase .php. So that way when I go to just the assignment 2 folder, it'll automatically load the index page. I won't have to type in anything. So again, that's going to be a requirement for this point and all going forward. All index pages need to be properly. So and again, let's do that together. So I'm just going to create a new file. Again, the proper way, you should probably make the files on your local computer and then drag them up each time. I'm just showing a quick, in general, what you're going to be having on your server for your assignment here. So you're going to have 3 files. If I can spell right, PHP page. Again, this probably is not a good idea because now, like, these are only on my web server. They're not on my local computer. It probably would have been smarter to create them first on my local computer, edit them, change them, and then when I was done editing, as I changed them, upload them to the server. Again, I'm just showing you, you're going to have 3 files in a folder called assignment 2. And one of them is going to be called index.php, so it automatically runs. On this page is basically going to be 2 links. One link to your first PHP page.php and one to your PHP info page.php. Please include your name as a heading on your index page of some kind. Set the background color to just any color as long as it's different. Use some additional CSS. I don't actually give specifics, just make sure you're using some of some kind. Incorporate at least one table and include at least some PHP, HTML, and CSS comments. You need at least one of each to get credit for this part. Let's pause for a second because I have at the bottom an example. So let's open up that so we can kind of look at that first one. So again, if you look at the URL here, I just went straight to the folder. I didn't actually tell it /index.php because it's just going to auto load that page. And again, pretty basic, header, name, some CSS, got a table, and it has 2 links here to my first PHP page and to my PHP info page. So speaking of those, let's take a look at those. So the first one is first PHP page.php. And basically you just need to have a couple different examples of PHP code on this. So you need to have an example of an echo or print statement, an example of a PHP variable, an example of concatenation, an example of a PHP comment, and then also in addition to the PHP, include some regular HTML with the PHP, such as a line of text or an image. Please also include all the normal HTML tags, so HTML, header, body, etc. So if we go take a look at this first one, this is an example of what it could look like. Again, I don't mind actually giving you might be thinking, oh great, he gave us an example, we can just go steal the source code. Well, remember, this is only the outputted HTML. You don't actually see any of the PHP behind the scenes here. So you'll have to go through and actually add PHP to make something that makes an output similar to this. I will also point out, so again, basically you could probably for each one of these, just go to the PowerPoint and look at the examples for each one of these, look up the echo and print, the PHP variables, and as long as you're changing them up slightly, that's okay. Like that's the point of this assignment is that you're kind of looking back at the examples from the PowerPoint and making your own and putting them together. But the idea is that you need to make sure that you're doing all these requirements to get full credit. And the last part is you need to have a PHP info.php page that acts as a PHP info page. So again, this one's pretty straightforward. If you go back here and hit here, we'll see the a regular PHP info page. Now, given this one, I did show you the source code for it. It's this. There's nothing else to it. So that one should be pretty easy. But the main thing is making sure that you're using it, the one line of code, and not just copy and pasting the outputted HTML, that you're actually understanding that you can use this one line of code that turns into this. That's it. You'll be graded on the following criteria. So completing all the requirements, properly used code, no error messages, index file works properly, so it should be named index.php, all lowercase, and no spaces or uppercase. And if you need to see that example again, you can see that here. It's just under the INFOST 440 URL. Extra credit for this week. So again, you guys don't actually know too much technical stuff yet, so it's hard to make an actual challenging extra credit. So this one's also going to be relatively on the easy side if you want a nice little cushion to your grade for later. Basically, it's 3 questions again that you have to look up and figure out how to find. But basically, what version of PHP is running on your web space? What is the maximum upload size for uploading a file to your web space? And what version of the extension file info is running on your web space? So basically, you need to find a spot that has a lot of information about your web space, something that maybe has a lot of PHP information, or I don't know. I come up with a pun, but basically, it's going to be something with your PHP info. There's your hint with that. But that's all I have for you guys. So again, hopefully we'll be back in for the on-site class. Hopefully we'll see you next week. And for the online class, we'll continue seeing you online and with discussions and stuff. So again, for the upcoming Monday, your 2 deliverables for both the online and the on-site class is that you guys need to do the assignment 2 as well as the discussion post. But that's all I got. All right, you guys have a great rest of your week and stay warm.